stores and where they were stocked up pretty well on M16s. So they were not looking at the whole data set of all guns dropped at crime scenes. And by the way, the reason that they tend to pick up guns at crime scenes is that it's a major offense to have the guns we're talking about in Mexico. You can get a gun after very much difficulty, and when you finally get your permit, if you drive to the one gun store in the whole republic, which is located somewhere in Mexico City.
Right, run by the military.
Then you can go get your probably a .38 or a .380 or a bolt-action rifle or something suitable for hunting, you know. And
no military calibers.
No military calibers. Nothing above .380. Nothing that's semi-automatic rifle that accepts a box magazine. So that's the dirty little secret in Mexico is that if you look at all of the guns that are turned up at crime scenes, then you're talking about 13%, give or take, that have come from folks like you and me that had it stolen, or in Fast and Furious, some bad guy that bought one. But it's not the M16 battle rifle that is frequently, or an AK-47, that was not sourced back to the United States. Might have even been a semi-auto, but it did not come across Mexico's northern border. It came across one of its southern borders, or it came across some water in a boat, probably with a whole bunch of dope, and then one of the containers would have been firearms. So that's what they didn't want to talk about, that the number they had been giving out, we unpeeled, and we saw, you guys are lying. You're lying with numbers. And so I think a minor incentive for Fast and Furious was to try to address that specific gotcha, but mainly, of course, they were just trying to create a narrative that the U.S. gun owner is really a careless, dangerous guy, and if we don't regulate him more because of what's happening to our poor neighbor to the south, then we just need some more gun control. That's all we can do. Of course, it turned out what we've been learning from Fast and Furious is we need more government control.
One thing that they never talk about when they're talking about now the majority of these drug cartel soldiers,
right?
They like the AK. Now you can buy semi-automatic only AKs, and I guess with the help of the ATF, smuggle them across the border and equip these things. But the AK, the way the AK is designed, it's meant to be run fully automatic. That's what the gun is designed for. Most of your off-the-shelf AKs are not accurate rifles, but when you put it on rock and roll, they do a really good job of slinging lead. So they have to be coming somewhere then besides here. So we know they have federal troops on their southern border to keep out the undesirable Hispanics that they don't like, and when they do make it through abuse. Could it be said possibly that somewhere in the line of the federal troops, between the federal troops and the federal government, there's some permissive things happening down there on that southern border, allowing these weapons to come through?
Gee, do you think? There's a lot of money in all of that, and we know that they've had corruption problems because they pay military, they pay police very low salaries, and so those guys are tempted very strongly. I mean, what's the big deal? We're talking about 2 or 3 rifles maybe that one of them can get his hands on from an evidence room or wherever, and he's going to make maybe a year's salary by selling them on the black market. So that's whatever they do make for it is more than they can get doing almost anything else, and so it happens absolutely.
Gunowners of America. When we're looking at this, and when I'm reading stuff and I'm doing things, Eric actually confirms something because I see the fingerprints of what a Gunowners of America operation, and they always attribute it to somebody else, don't they?
Frequently, when something goes right, it's attributed to the NRA because the media, I think, likes attributing it to the NRA. First of all, they may not know any better, but even if they do, they realize that they'd rather deal with the NRA that has a more traditional lobbying model or paradigm, and they're easier for the media to kind of boss around. And they know that if they try to intimidate gun owners of America, it's just not going to happen.
Oh, gosh. I just wanted you to say that. That's all. That'll play so well over the podcast. That part. The gun trafficking that they describe here, they're always going after the gun show loopholes and all this other stuff because of the vast, as you put it, river of iron that snakes its way around and makes its way into the hands of criminals. That doesn't even exist in the United States, does it?
What exists is so de minimis that it's not worth talking about. Even the ATF has done analyses and found that less than 1% of guns that turn up in crime came from gun shows. So the media would have you think that somehow there's a couple of booths at every gun show that says criminals are us, and that's where everybody's doing their business. And it just couldn't be farther from the truth.
The only time there's really some really good gun trafficking going on, it has to be stimulated by the ATF.
Yeah, maybe what we ought to do is sell the T-shirt, hopefully it doesn't have a copyright, that says, I'm the only guy in the whole country that didn't get a gun from Fast and Furious.
If you do that, I want an autograph. I want it autographed right across the front. I do. That would be better. That would be better than the Spoons shirt, the Spoons and Rosie O'Donnell shirt.
Although it does sell well every time she opens her fat mouth. If pencils cause misspelling and spoons made Rosie O'Donnell fat, then guns cause crime.
Let me ask you a question. Why do you think the Brits want us to be unarmed so vociferously? Why are they so adamant that we become unarmed?
I think they're still trying to win the war for independence to beat us. They understand, perhaps not approvingly or very intelligently, but they do kind of have a basic concept that all us yahoos over here running around with guns represent a threat to the legal government power, to unconstitutional government power, to illegitimate government power. And that's what our Second Amendment is all about. Never was about hunting, never was about recreation. I think those are rights indeed, but I think they're protected among the unenumerated rights in the Ninth Amendment. The Second Amendment is all about making sure that guys with attitudes like you and me have a right to individually own military weapons, firearms, long arms, handguns, and that we be ever ready to point them at the government. It's intended to limit the government from overstepping its legitimate roles. And now, the government has been way over bounds for some time, and that's probably why even the ruling class in our country would so desperately like to disarm us. But the Brits have a different mindset from what we have here still. In England, the people of that realm are subjects. They are subjects and belong to the king, who ultimately speaks for the whole country. In the United States, we're citizens, and our folks in the government, properly understood, are our employees. And we've been letting our employees loot us for quite some time, and it's about time that we rose up and told our employees, get back in your box, it's called the Constitution, because if you don't, we're coming for you.
One of the things that now I've never been associated with Gunowners of America during an election year, so this is really sort of a question. During this time of year, do you get a little more broadly political when you're going out and about and looking for good politicians to support who back the Second Amendment? And is it correct of me to assume that a Second Amendment politician in waiting, one that's trying to run for office, for a while, that guy's going to be fairly conservative, because the Second Amendment is really an ultimate declaration of conservatism. But am I right about when you go out there, what you've done with Mr. Murdoch, what you've done with Ted Cruz, and all these other people that I believe, is there somebody named Stockman out there that you've been working with as well? That's
right, a congressman-elect from a 70% Republican conservative district outside of Houston. So unless God has some amazing interruption in mind, the guy's coming to Congress. I'm not even sure he has a Democrat opponent. And if he does, bless that guy's heart. It's not going to be a very productive activity.
Not for him, anyway. Not that day.
But not that day. So what we look for in a candidate is two things. First of all, they have to be down the line on the Second Amendment if we're going to support them at all. But secondly, we're looking for a character trait. We're looking for somebody who will do what Stockman did. When he had his one term in the Congress with the class of 94, that's when Stockman introduced a bill to overturn the gun ban that had, just before that class sat, Clinton had got a semi-automatic ban through, the so-called assault weapons ban, and Stockman introduced a repealer, and the leadership didn't want that subject brought up. They were still like the battered wives. They could go right through the door and leave, but they were too afraid. And so, same with the Republican leadership. They've been told for so many years by the media that the gun issue was toxic, that even though Bill Clinton said, my bad, I shouldn't have pushed the assault weapon ban, that's what cost my class control of my party, control of the House of Representatives, that hadn't gotten through the Republican leadership. And so they were telling Stockman they weren't going to let him even get a vote on his bill. He had to go into caucus and say, look, I'm going to work with Gunowners of America, and we're going to beat the snot out of you in your districts if you don't have a vote on this pronto. And Gingrich said, boy, that's right. And so he told Dick Armey and the rest of the caucus, we got to have a vote now, or else GOA will be in our districts messing us over. And so that's how we got the vote on it. Now, Bob Dole smothered it in the Senate, but the fact is Stockman is willing to take on his own leadership. That's shall we say, a not very normal quality among even conservatives. And that's why when you find somebody like that, you have found somebody that's worth backing at great cost. And we did go into his race. He had a multi-candidate primary because that everybody understood that if you win the Republican primary, you're the man. You're going to be going to Washington. And so there were perhaps, I think, 7 candidates competing. It got narrowed down to Steve and a multimillionaire in the runoff. And on a budget of $150,000, Steve Stockman prevailed. And we went in there we did polling to identify pro-Second Amendment voters, and we did robocalls to get them out to vote. And we actually, it turned out in that district about 90% of the voters thought guns were a big deal, so we probably didn't really need to identify the pro-Second Amendment people, because it was just about everybody in that particular district. But that's what we were willing to do. Now, that cost a lot of money. We spent tens of thousands of dollars doing that, but look at the payout. It's incalculable. It's priceless. To get somebody who's actually willing to make things happen, to make his own caucus make things happen, is absolutely essential if we're going to roll back federal gun control legislation. We haven't had really serious opportunities and efforts to do that for a long time. And so we get a guy like Steve Stockman in there. Now, the pro-lifers are going to be happy with him. The tax limitation people are going to be happy with him. The